right, if I might, call this meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. And if I then might ask you all to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, first up, we've got some special recognition for the Stratford Elementary School's Odyssey of the Mind team. Stratfield Elementary School's Odyssey of the Mind. And we have some certificates to present. So, nice if you can join me at the podium here.
We'd be glad to.
All right. Come on up, team. We've got some broader recognition here, too. Is Stephanie Holroyd here? Coach, come on up. You don't get to get out of this yet. Stephanie, here you go.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. That's Stephanie. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think that, taking a moment here briefly, this is about the Odyssey of the Mind team and the recognition they get. We do a lot of recognition of sports teams, and I think it's equally important, and our board has talked about that we recognize all the special kids in Fairfield and the work they do and the hard work they do in areas besides just athletics. So I want to congratulate your whole team here, and we've got special certificates for everybody. Oh, and one more coach. Yeah. Amy Carey. You don't get to hide away from this. I'm going to stay over here, so you have to shake all our hands. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Congratulations, Amy.
Thank you. You deserve it.
All right. Now, for the team members, Brody Hopkinson. Brody, congratulations.
Yay. Brody, congrats.
Good job.
Bridget Carey.
Congratulations, Richard.
Blake Holroyd.
Good job, Blake.
Congrats, Blake.
All right. Claire Cherniski. Cherniski. All right. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Claire. Maeve.
Wow. Maeve McManus. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Maeve.
And Michael McLeese. Thank you.
Congratulations, Michael.
Good job, Michael.
And could one of the coaches come up and just address what's special about the team and what they've been able to accomplish?
I don't know
Right at the podium.
if you know about Odyssey of the Mind. It is a problem-solving competition. And the children were given, there's 5 different types of problems, and we took one of the classics. We had to create a skit, basically, and solve a problem of finding 3 works of art that had to appear on an architectural structure. We picked the Notre Dame Cathedral. And they had to disappear and then reappear, and 2 characters had to go on a quest. And in 8 minutes, you have to solve that. We had to have props and costumes, and it was a great task. We worked on it for the whole year. They had a wonderful time. Their experience and their growth was wonderful, as well as bonding as a team, being self-confident, performing in front of large groups. In all capacities, it was a wonderful experience. And I think the moms that, we had great parents that support us. It's a wonderful program, and I hope more schools in Fairfield participate. And if we can have everybody's support for that, that would be great. So,
Thank you.
It's all student-driven. We just facilitate the
Oh, right.
meetings, and, I mean, there's no outside assistance. It's all
Right.
kid-driven, and the teamwork is unbelievably amazing from start to finish. You see how they start and how they end. This is just this is their final project. They made gargoyles. There were 2 costumes, and the cathedral's in the back room, which was pretty much all recycled
materials.
So it didn't have to be any certain size. They came up with this all on their own and did all the artwork, and they just did amazing.
Wrote the
So
script.
proud of them.
We just guide them and keep them on task, but it's not our input, it's all of them. So it's a wonderful thing.
That's tremendous. Thank you again.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before the Stratfield team goes, I just want to say it's my home team, Stratfield, and it's really wonderful to see you all here, and thank you for all your hard work.
Just speaking for somebody from the older generations, it's great to know that if we don't solve all the problems in our generation, that there's another group coming up behind us that take care of whatever we leave. All right, and then we have one other recognition for Connecticut Challenge founder and CEO Jeff Keith, and we have a proclamation here that I will read from the town of Fairfield. Whereas Jeff Keith is founder and chief executive officer of Connecticut Challenge, a charity that funds cancer research and survivorship programs for individuals with cancer. And whereas Jeff, a 38-year cancer survivor, has performed incredible feats during his lifetime, he has raised over $1 million for the American Cancer Society by becoming the first amputee to run across the United States. And whereas as a cancer survivor and philanthropist, Jeff has focused on leading initiatives through development and fundraising in the cancer arena that range from discovery research to state-of-the-art cancer survivor programs at institutions like Yale Cancer Center, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, St. Vincent's Medical Center, and most recently the Connecticut Challenge Center for Survivorship. And whereas Jeff founded 3 separate nonprofit organizations, including Swim Across America, Swim Across the Sound, and the Connecticut Challenge. And in the past 25 years, these organizations, all of which are determined to support cancer survivors, have raised over $75 million and have been supported by dedicated volunteers and donors. And whereas in October of 2012, the Connecticut Challenge opened the Center for Survivorship in Southport, an 8,000 square foot facility that provides a number of resources to cancer survivors. Jeff's efforts with Connecticut Challenge have made him instrumental in the fight against cancer, and his avid support of the center shows he is determined every day to help cancer survivors and their families. Now, therefore, I, Michael C. Tetro, first selectman of the town of Fairfield, do hereby proclaim June 19th, 2013 as Jeff Keith Day throughout the town of Fairfield. Congratulations.
Thank you. I thought I would bring up one of our strong supporters, and Tony Wong has been with us since day one. As many of you know, it takes a flicker of light to start something, but no organization is successful without surrounding yourself with really good people, great team. Tony's been with us from the start. Got us up to the state capitol. But the Connecticut Challenge is really an organization that is really now reaching people across the country. The organization, yes, we have a Center for Survivorships in Fairfield, which is a resource for people who live in this area that provides exercise, nutrition, and psychosocial support for cancer survivors anywhere. But it's also the first standalone kind of its kind in the country. There is no other center like this in the United States. The organization now, our reach across this country, we have people that we impact in 49 states and 40 countries that watch our videos online. Many of you know the organization as a charity bike ride because you see the signs in town, and we apologize. But we are a grassroots organization. We don't really get any state grants. All the money we raise through the bike ride fuels the engine and allows us to do the work that we do. We impact the lives of over 58,000 survivors in the state through the programs we fund, and our goal is to be the #1 cancer survivor organization in the country. We were recently recognized at the NCAA Final Four in both basketball and in lacrosse, and so our reach, we really just begun. And it's the town of Fairfield that I'm proud to have spent most of my life here that's really gotten behind this organization and will help us build And in 10 years, we'll be able to stand here and say that we are the largest athletic fundraiser in the country and the largest cancer survivor organization in the state. So on behalf of our entire team, Tony, organization, thank you for all your support in the town, quietly, through the retailers, through small businesses, through families, through friends. It's just really been a phenomenal effort behind the scenes, and I can't thank the town enough.
If I may, I just want to add that the mission of the Connecticut Challenge is to empower cancer survivors to live a full and fulfilling life. And Jeff is an inspiration of that, but I would encourage people to explore the site, ConnecticutChallenge.com, to understand what the ride means. I mean, I've been involved since the beginning, but it wasn't until I went through the ride and fully understood the true embodiment of what the challenge is about, is the fact that when you have cancer, as traumatic as it is, that you can fight through it, that you're going to have the support, and that physical fitness, balance with nutrition, and a support network are essential to the continued survival. And what you have in this Connecticut Challenge, in the Survivorship Center, is all of that to help people. And it's a very powerful message that, having done just the relay, you're telling people that you can beat this, and we're going to continue to live fully. And the other thing I want to add and encourage people as they're watching this is the fact that the bike ride is important, but donations to that effect are very important. The Survivorship Center is operating 365 days out of the year, and it's a fixed cost now. Provides an incredible service to the community, but it costs money. And I would encourage people to find out truly and be touched by what the challenge does and how cancer survivors can be so inspirational. And that, what Jeff does and what all the people out there that are advocating on behalf of fighting cancer, you do something really special. And you continue to do it, and it makes all the difference in the world. So I'm proud to be up here with you.
Tony's wearing his biking jersey.
Yeah.
He's getting ready
Yeah.
for 3 weeks. So thank you
all right,
again
thank you
for
again.
all the recognition. Appreciate it.
I just also want to echo my thanks to Jeff. My daughter has directed us to change our summer weekend plans so that we can be here this year for the ride to experience it ourselves, and I think it's appropriate that you're here. We're going to be talking about a bike and pedestrian plan, so it's funny how things connect. But thank you. You really are an inspiration for the community, for all of us. Thank you.
Kevin?
Thank you, sir. Jeff, I just want to say thank you. Last summer, when you opened up your center, I had the luxury of being able to attend your opening night. And I was there with my date for the night, and my date for the night was my mother-in-law, who is a cancer survivor. And we spent the evening meeting your friends, some family, all your volunteers, and the people who support your organization. And we were moved by everything you do, and we were touched by all the stories we heard and the support that you're providing every survivor in every possible way. Your facility is beautiful. Your work is awesome. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Only just begun.
All right. All right. Next up, to consider and act upon the minutes of special meeting May 14th, regular meeting May 15th, and special meeting May 22nd, and regular meeting June 5th. I think we may have to take these individually. Can we take the first three together?
Yes.
That works for me, yes.
All right. May I have a motion to accept the first 3 minutes as presented?
So moved.
A second?
Second,
All right, any discussion or changes to the minutes?
not on those.
All right. Then, we ready to vote? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. For the last one, meeting June 5th, may I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All right, any further discussion?
I have a number of changes and amendments, which I will provide in writing to the secretary.
Do you want to do
May I read
those
the-
here now, or do you want to get those and postpone this item to our next meeting?
Whatever your preference is, I can do that and provide it in written form, and then we can do that, yep.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't able to get
All right,
that's
if
it.
I can have a motion to postpone,
Motion to postpone these minutes,
And-
approval until our next regular meeting,
and that will be July 2nd.
July 2nd.
Second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, next up, the Bike and Pedestrian Plan Advisory Committee. Resolved that in accordance with a request from the Bike and Pedestrian Plan Advisory Committee, the Fairfield Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan be and hereby is approved. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Now, I know we had a presentation of this at our last meeting.
We did.
Do we have any follow-up on that? Was there any, and since I missed last meeting, any additional presentation that needed to be done?
For me, none. They did a wonderful job presenting. They answered our questions. We had questions about education and getting the word out and how to go through a stop sign safely. And they did a great job of presenting their plan, short-term and long-term, and how they wanted to get it implemented to make our streets and our walkways safe for everyone, pedestrians and bikers and drivers. And it's a wonderful project, certainly worthy of support.
Kristen?
A couple things. One, just to note that I joined the committee last Wednesday in between our two meetings. We were also joined by Mark Barnhart, which was wonderful. And there were some recommended amendments resulting in draft 9. So draft 8 was actually here last week. So though not major changes, I wanted to just touch base on two particular areas of the plan that really have more of an impact here at the Board of Selectmen level. I think there are a couple pieces. This plan is a plan that, as we talked about last time, touches on many parts of the town. Certainly the hope is that this plan will go forward and be put before the TP&Z so that it will become part of our plan of conservation and development. And that is an action that belongs to that body. There are other actions or proposed and recommended actions that would be administrative, that would be done through the work of department heads and with the first selectman. But there are two particular pieces of the plan that reference us as a body by name, the Board of Selectmen. So on page 7, I'll start with that, which is the proposed complete streets policy. Again, emphasizing that this is a plan and is a series of proposals. There aren't mandates, so to speak. I think there are things that we really, at least, my experience of working through this document is that the group certainly has strong feelings about the recommendations, but it's really up to us as a Board of Selectmen, as town elected officials, to see how we choose to implement and go forward with these recommendations. So just to specifically look at the complete streets policy, the committee does recommend that the Board of Selectmen adopt a complete streets policy. Not through this vote today, but at a later time in the future. And there is, again, some recommended language. There's actually quite a bit of recommended language in here that goes through that. So I just want to make sure that as we're looking at this document that we're clear about that, because that's something that would involve further discussion on our end in the future. And I hope that we will have that discussion. Again, it's a recommendation as part of the plan. And then the second piece I wanted to point out was on page 9, which is part of the institutional recommendations. And though this recommendation was in draft 8, there were some changes in wording, but essentially the committee is recommending that we create a standing bicycle and pedestrian committee. The current committee has an expiration date of, I can't remember when, but there's December 2013, thank you. And it's an advisory committee. So this is recommending, again, a recommendation that the Board of Selectmen appoints a standing committee that would essentially carry out the tasks as outlined below number 1. Obviously, any standing committee, as with other committees, if there was, the first selectman was appointing a committee and putting forth a charge, or the board of selectmen was, that would be an item of conversation. So, these are clearly the recommendations that the committee has talked through, but I just wanted to make sure that we had that clearly on the table as we're moving forward, and we're aware of a potential role for this board in the future.
Good.
Any further comments?
No.
Just, and again, I did miss the last meeting. By way of recommendations, these are broken out. I'm looking at educational recommendations, planning recommendations, enforcement recommendations. The next step in this process is on to planning and zoning. Some of these recommendations can be done, as Kristen, as I think you were saying, by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some of these look beyond the scope of planning and zoning,
Right.
and I guess my question would be, did you talk about that? Should we ask the committee to maybe address this in terms of how they saw this being implemented?
Yeah, no, I think that actually was part of the conversation at not the meeting here at the Board of Selectmen, but last week with the committee. And I think there are a number of areas. I think it would be wonderful if we would ask
Sure.
the chair to
Chair,
perhaps
if you would,
address that.
perhaps come to the podium. My question is, I look at, and again, I echo my colleagues' comments on how well done this is and how thorough it is, because it's so thorough. There are a number of recommendations in different areas. So part of my question is, how do you see those moving through? Some of these, certainly it's appropriate for this to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, so those areas that they're responsible for, they can incorporate this into the master plan as they deem appropriate. However, in these other areas, how did you envision, or your committee envision this progressing from here?
Well, envision it being administered or monitored, if you will, I guess, for lack of a better word, by the committee that Kristen had previously spoken about. Again, yeah, 75% or at least is outside the purview. I shouldn't say 75%. A good amount of that plan is outside the direct purview of TPZ. The education recommendations are not within their jurisdiction. The enforcement recommendations are not within their jurisdiction. But the infrastructure and planning are, within their general overview when they, adjust the plan of conservation development. But the committee that we recommend, the standing committee that we recommend, is the implementation mechanism. And it's really meant to be a coordination body between the various affected entities in town. So it's an effort to make sure that everyone is talking to one another. And the plan of conservation and development is just the best vehicle that we have for this plan to sit. Having it serve as a standalone plan is an option, but we're under the opinion that the plan of conservation and development, based on previous plans of this nature that have been developed, is the best location for this to be sitting in the future.
And there are recommendations in a number of areas, and not to go through all those, but just to kind of help step through how that might work. There's some recommendations here for the Fairfield Metro Center, and the reason that jumps out is it's property of the state, and it's operated by a independent contractor that the state hires, so it really, the town has no jurisdiction other than possibly some approval pieces on certain aspects of that. So when it says things like construct a pedestrian bridge over the Ash Creek Walkway, that are certainly proposed by the Greater Bridgeport Regional Planning Authority. There's discussions about doing that. It has to get through Bridgeport, Fairfield Conservation,
Sure.
the Metro Center, and I believe the private developer, since I believe it's supposed to touch land on his property. How does these recommendations kind of get implemented, or how are they, what's the approach with these, I guess, to say?
Right. It would be an approach that, even though we have recommendations for the Metro Center, which is sort of the glaring sort of state property, as well as we've also promoted recommendations for state highway, locations that affect state highways around the town. It would be our opinion that the town would be in an advocacy position for these elements and for these recommendations. They may not have direct, decision-making capabilities, but the town would have a position that this is a recommendation of the plan that needs closer coordination. For instance, the pedestrian bridge, closer coordination between the GBR, the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council, the developer, the town, the Wetlands Commission, all the affected bodies. So again, that this is part of the plan. The recommendation is that they go forward with it, but with further study down the line between the various entities. That this is not meant to be just on town-affected issues in the property.
Then,
May
go
I
ahead.
jump in
Go
as a
ahead. Yes,
follow-up?
please.
I think I'd love to use the North Brenton Bridge work that's being done as an example of conversation and advocacy, or perhaps the conversation with Exide and Mill River, that the town right now is serving very effectively through the various commissions and through your work from the First Selectman's office as an advocate in the conversation for the process, though we know that in the end, we are not the decision makers in that process. Similarly, it would be the hope that a committee would be a place where, and I think one of the members who spoke last time talked about, it kind of ties a ribbon around a number of pieces and comes at it from a certain perspective and allows that conversation to take place, recognizing that the state has jurisdiction with that in the bridge example, but that we would help the state be aware of what the people of the town seek and be able to clearly advocate for the needs of the people of the town.
Sure.
Something, yeah, I just thought of something, because there are a lot of great ideas here, a lot of great recommendations, and they're coming from different directions. And you folks have probably already done this at one of your meetings, but maybe for the reader, for us, maybe it would be helpful if we had some type of a project matrix, if you will, a roadmap, if you will, right? That could break down maybe all of the recommendations, what their components are, who's the owner, who's responsible for driving it through, what government or what agencies need to be involved, or what approvals might be necessary at the state or local or any other level, and whether it affects private ownership, or a neighborhood association, or whoever might own or an adjacent piece of land. But I've always found it easy that if I have a project plan and I can look at things that are either in priority or in order of however you think you want to do them, that if there was a matrix that would even show a timeline, maybe that would help answer some of these questions that are written up very nicely but in different sections in kind of a table, something along those lines, just to kind of summarize or synopsize it.
Well, I can answer, or Christine, you do have something to say, or?
I'll defer to the...
Have you guys already done that?
No, that actually is something that we had discussed, but there were concerns about pinning certain entities as responsible parties to certain tasks.
Okay.
That's pretty much the general
Okay.
feeling that we came to as a body, that there were some concerns with that if we started assigning departments tasks, even though in a lot of ways it's totally valid, that it might meet some resistance from the town staff or various departments, and that's pretty much it.
May I jump in?
Yeah. I was thinking at a high level, though, without specifically saying, Kristen, do this, Mike, do that kind of a thing. Just
it's...
the general process.
It's a very valid question, and we had, as, again, I participated, I actually was one of the people saying, I think there are a lot of administrative pieces that come from management, and I am very hesitant with the committee saying, Mike needs to tell, the First Selectman needs to tell our Community and Economic Development Director this or that. So that's part of that was part of my hesitation, because I do think that there are pieces of this that, some of those are management decisions, but some of those, and I'd like to actually just use enforcement recommendations as an example. So enforcement on page 10.
Okay.
Those, clearly enforcement is just by its nature going to fall to the police department. So just for example, with that, the way the process worked with the enforcement recommendations was that those recommendations were forwarded to both the chief and the police commission for their review. And what was clear in the conversation there, and as well, there were members of the committee who met with members of the police commission, or a member of the police commission, the chair, actually. But that those are recommendations that, some of which are going to be more difficult to put into place, and others of which will be not a problem for them, or things that they are already doing and will continue to do. And that, again, they're clear that those are recommendations that the committee has made. Some of the other recommendations in the immediately following section in education, those are ongoing conversations, and some of those could happen in ways that we don't anticipate. For example, Sarah Levy talked last time about the education with the Parks and Rec Department and the camps now about bicycle and pedestrian safety, which is one of the recommendations. And so there are multiple pieces that there are a lot of options. And I think that was, at least my perspective was, I prefer that plan to have the options available rather than, you could have a proposed matrix.
Right.
And certainly there was conversation, and I think the committee would be really happy to assign, so to speak. But again, I resisted that, in that it seems to me that our department heads and our managers, along with the first selectman and his staff, would have, for some of these recommendations, not all of them, would have a better sense as to where they more properly fit. So that's part of why that wasn't specified in that way.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
what I would see is something it's not quite a project plan with dates, because some of these fall into priority issues, not to mention budget constraints in some cases. But it might be helpful, say if this is handed to the police commission, the commission members, if they knew which pages or which items referred to the police commission versus some of the others. While they might want to read the whole thing, they might also want to say, what's my responsibility, what's our commission? So if there was some way of tagging these back in a summary document to which commission, be it planning and zoning, be it conservation, be it engineering, be it the selectman's office, board of selectmen, that might be helpful in terms of folks not missing something that's relevant in their area. Now, there might be some of these that are relevant to every area, like general guideline to do the following, but there might be some that are specifically tagged to certain departments, so those respective commissions or departments might have a shot at doing that. So, not that impacts the quality of the document or what we're doing here today, but from an implementation standpoint and ease of use or ease of finding how it relates to a given department, that might be something for the group to consider.
Definitely, and I would propose that it be a sort of a working table or a working document. That this is a document that's developed, again, in coordination with the First Selectman's Office, the Police Commission, the Health Department, the Parks Department, working with them, saying, we've identified these tasks, as to fall under your your purview. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a better department recommendation? So that the matrix, call it a responsibility matrix or a coordination matrix, is not necessarily a piece of the plan, but is exactly what you said, an implementation tool, and that will continue to evolve just like the plan will over time. So I would agree.
Okay. Any further discussion on the board?
We're having a hard time hearing us in the back.
Are they?
Are you having trouble hearing us in the back? You are. Okay.
Well, sorry about that. We will endeavor to use our outside voices. We will talk less softly. All right?
No, these aren't microphones.
These are microphones for the TV.
Thank you for letting us know.
But, yes. All right, are we okay with the resolution as it's written?
The one amendment that I would propose for the resolution, because we know that this plan will be going forward to planning and zoning, and that's an approval process as part of the plan of conservation and development. So perhaps, I'm going to move to amend this resolution to replace the word approved with endorsed. Just so that we are not, so it's clear the different roles that we have as boards.
I understand. Your full amendment? Is
It
there a
is.
second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Can you just help me understand?
Well, I think, again, as we are approving, I think what we're doing here really is we're saying, yes, we agree with this plan and with the recommendations here. When this document goes before the TP&Z, it will have to go through a more formal approval process. So in a sense, I'm just kind of differentiating between the two. Perhaps it's just semantics, but I think that our endorsement of this plan is not dissimilar to an approval, but again, I'm open to discussion, but for purposes of the discussion, wanted to bring that forward.
My take on what you're saying is we're basically recommending to the Town Planning and Zoning Commission they consider incorporating this into the master plan. We're not part of our vote on this isn't a final step or a final approval, that it really takes the other departments and commissions to put it in, so we're endorsing it as opposed to,
Approving it?
yes.
Is there any, what would be the downside to endorsing it versus approving it if it's semantics? Is there any less teeth to our vote or our action by changing that word? Does it make a difference? Does it mean anything?
Do you want to go?
My opinion about this plan is it really only means something, even if it's approved at the TP&Z level, if we follow through as a town on the implementation. So honestly, for me, whether we approve or endorse it, it's what we choose to do with it that will actually make a difference. And I do think that the next steps, for example, approving a complete streets policy, that would be an important implementation step that then would have teeth, although even the language in there says, there are ways to back off of that if we need to in circumstances that it's not possible to do that. So in other words, for me, from our board's perspective in terms of approval, it's back to what I started with. I think it's important that we go forward with this and that we bring to the table a complete streets policy and talk about approving that, and that we bring to the table a conversation about creating a committee and approve that. So I'm not opposed to using the approval language. It was more semantics, I think, in terms of looking forward to the other board. And, I'm not set in stone on this.
All right.
I'm also interested
Yeah.
if the committee has any.
From my standpoint, I think it's a little more than semantics. I think that basically we're recommending to the Town Planning and Zoning that look at this. We're stepping into their area, their expertise, where they spend all their time. And the recommendations on the police side. We're recommending that the Police Commission take a look at those. We're not approving those in that sense. That's their bailiwick, that's their territory. They spend all their time looking at speed limits, traffic calming measures, how to best implement this. I think that we're not trying to redo their work or supersede what they do. I think we're recommending that based on our background experience and what we see from our board's perspective, this is worthy of serious consideration, and we encourage them to incorporate it in wherever it's appropriate.
So in that case, it is more than just semantics.
To me, it is. To me, it
Yeah,
is.
and I'm leaning that way too. So if it's more than semantics and it's material to some degree, I think we should briefly talk about that and if that's what we want to do. Because it sounds like that might be a proper first step to make. I'm not disagreeing with that because more than likely, if there's a part of, if there are any parts of these that need funding or further approvals, we could see them again
Right.
as part of an official approval of that component. That's kind of what Kristen was saying. So,
For the ones that are appropriate to come back through this board.
Right,
There's some of
right,
these that would go
That
straight
would
to the
not.
police commission,
Right.
straight to
Right.
planning and zoning without coming back
Right.
through here.
Right.
So we're, it's basically giving
Right.
them jurisdiction or recognizing their jurisdiction
Right.
to accept these as they're written, tweak them as they need to be to fit within their plans
Mm-hmm.
and their vision of what's taking place. And I don't see it as either the purview of this board or that we have the background. We haven't spent that much time in the planning and zoning office or with that commission going through everything that they need to. So I think that all, as much as we can say these all make sense, and I think they are, and again, I think
Yeah.
it's well-written, well-explained. It certainly is comprehensive. This really does address a number of areas.
it does.
But I
Right.
wouldn't hold, anyway, it just seems it makes sense that we encourage everybody to look at this, we encourage them to accept it, and to me, the word endorse does that.
Okay. I think you've done a good job of explaining that. Thank you. So I can be supportive of that change.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right. If we're done, I think we should go to the public on the amendment. Jen, we did the original motion second, right?
Yes.
All right. Any comments from the public on the amendment, and the amendment only to the resolution? All right, seeing none, back to this board. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Jen, do you have the wording on that? So I believe it's just approved for endorsed? All right.
Right.
All right. Any further discussion from the board on the motion as amended?
No.
One quick comment. We had this past weekend, the bike route opened, and there was an amazing turnout of bikers and pedestrians, and of all ages, as Mr. Graceffa pointed out. And I think why I bring that up is because the bike piece tends to get a lot of press. But the reality is, every user ends up as a pedestrian. If you drive your car to a parking lot, you get out of your car and you become a pedestrian. So this plan, I just want to make sure that we're remembering that this is a bike and pedestrian plan that considers all users of all ages and abilities, and I think that's important to remember.
I heard it was relatively injury-free, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
And if I could, just one more question to you, if I could. Throughout this, is there an understanding or comprehension of the fact that a number of the recommendations here have some cost impacts, and that any of these would be done or supported within certain budget constraints?
There was, in fact. From the most obvious budgetary item that would be in there would be anything that we recommend for infrastructure, as well as there are education measures that we have recommended and enforcement recommendations that will, could possibly cost money depending on manpower and staffing. We were very sensitive on that, or in our opinion, we were very sensitive and very cognizant of that during the development process. For instance, I know I'm just going to talk about just bike infrastructure recommendation because it's most readily available. We worked within the existing road width. None of the infrastructure recommendations for bike routes or share the road routes require widening of roads or additional expenditures that way. We hope, as a committee, that the process that occurred with the Mill Plain route, that type of process occurs down the line, meaning the road was already being resurfaced, the engineering department and the health department came forward and says, we know this road is being resurfaced, we know this is a recommended route, why don't we do it now? And we go after this grant money, from the state, and resurface it and have the longest term use of this money in there. As well as we did recognize that funding is available from different sources if there is funding that's necessary. And so in the back of the plan, there actually is an appendix listing possible funding sources, not necessarily recommended, but possible funding sources, federal, state, municipal funding sources that the committee was recommending that the town explore for carrying out these measures. So it is something that we definitely were sensitive to.
Okay, very good, thank you. Give it a go to the vote. Any comments from the public? All right, seeing none, back to the board. Any further discussion? We ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good. Again, congratulations and great job on putting this report together.
Yes.
That's done. All right, next up, to hear a report from the Director of Community and Economic Development, Mr. Barnhart. He'll be back momentarily.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be sensitive to your agenda for the day and be brief in my report. I'm going to run through these slides. Should I wait for Mr. Kiley?
Yeah, let me just, brief intro here is that we had been updating the RTM on a pretty regular basis on the project status of the Metro Center. We reached the point where our month-to-month progress had slowed as we neared completion. So it seemed appropriate to, I think the RTM cut it back to kind of as needed. And I think we did one a couple months ago for the RTM. I thought it was appropriate at this point just to keep the Board of Selectmen updated as to where the Metro Center project stood and what the status was at this point. So I guess with that as an intro, Mr. Barnhart, if you could kind of step us through where we stand.
Well, as you know, construction was completed some time ago, actually more than a year and a half ago at this point, substantially
And
completed.
just, Mark, I think there's been, because of the, I think
The air
AC
conditioning?
working,
Okay.
if you could speak up a little bit, that would be appreciated by the folks in the room.
I will do my best. The station was placed into service in December of 2011. Construction was completed, substantially completed shortly before that time, obviously, with regard to Fairfield Metro. Really, my report will address both Fairfield Metro and the intersection projects. This is as of May 31st, 2013. Since the station was placed into service, we've been working through punch list items related to construction, which have long been disposed of at this point. And then we've been working through project documentation and closeout, including closeout reports, post-construction reports to various regulatory bodies. So let me just walk you through the expense summary. As of May 31st, we have expended on the Metro Center projects approximately $40.6 million. We have estimate approximately $100,000 left to spend, which is largely related to consultants to respond to comments from the DOT. It's actually less than $100,000, but it rounds off to that. Responding to comments from the DOT with regard to their audit, as well as comments from various regulatory bodies in relation to post-construction reports that we've submitted to them. Total project cost is estimated at $40.7 for Fairfield Metro. Turning to page 4, we'll look at the intersection improvement project. We project to spend a total of $4.3 million. That project is, for the most part, completed. Again, we have a few pieces of paperwork yet to finish. Namely, once the project costs have been completely finalized, we have a supplemental grant agreement to be executed and finalized with the state that will allow us to get reimbursement for some of our project costs. And we're in the process of, again, responding to comments from the DOT with regard to the audit and resolving any issues that they may have with project documentation. So combined, for the two projects, we project total cost to be about $45 million. which is under what we had projected earlier. Project revenues, now on page 7, by source and project. You can see the breakdown there. Project revenues for Metro are estimated 40.8, the intersection 44.2. Total revenues equal the expenses of $45 million. And most importantly, where we are in terms of getting reimbursement for some of these costs. That can be found on page 8. We have received to date a total of $43.2 million against that projected cost of $45 million. We have about 1.9 outstanding. 500,000 is due from the state of Connecticut once the town has responded adequately to comments from the audit report, and we have, the state has accepted the project. They're holding $500,000 essentially as retainage pending final acceptance of the project and completion of our post-construction reporting obligations. We're essentially in the same position with regard to the intersection project. The state, we have an accounts receivable with the state of about $500,000, again related to final project acceptance, the execution of that supplemental grant agreement, which would again pave the way for us, no pun intended, receiving the balance of the money owed on that project, which is estimated at $500,000. And lastly, we have the conservation bond that's still outstanding. So if we go to the last page in the back, I've tried to save paper by double-siding these things. Page 10, as I noted, we're in the process of responding to DOT's audit comments for both projects. I believe we've actually responded to the comments from the state with regard to the intersection project. We should have comments or a response back to the DOT with regard to Fairfield Metro within the next 2 weeks. We then have to have final project acceptance. The state will actually formally accept the project, and then we would anticipate receipt of the $500,000 retainage that they're still holding pending that action. We still need to record some easements with BlackRock Realty. The town attorney, I know, is working on those issues. And as I just mentioned, we are in the process of preparing and submitting a request for release of the bond. This is a construction bond that the Inland Wetlands Commission is holding. One of the things that we needed to do was submit to them a post-construction report, which we did back in December. They have been reviewing that and providing comments to us and responding to those comments. And as we do that, we will be requesting release of the bond. There is the small matter of the transfer of the south side land at the existing Fairfield Center Station, which has not yet been consummated. We were waiting the state's completion of the survey, which has since been completed, and now we are just waiting for them to execute a quitclaim deed for that property. And lastly, with regard to the intersection, it's simply finalizing the grant agreement so that then we can get our reimbursement for those costs that we're eligible to receive reimbursement for. So I'd be happy to respond to any questions at this time.
Questions from the board?
I have a couple. Thank you. Thanks for being here. We do appreciate the update. Quickly, I haven't seen this formatted document in a while, and I know back in the summer of 11, when we were first getting reports, it looked like there was an original, what we think it's going to cost budget.
Yep.
Can we see, you mentioned that we're under that number? Is that
Yes.
the number you're referring to?
Yes.
Can we see this versus that
Sure.
as a follow-up, just so we can kind of see what we looked at a year and a half ago versus where we are, and the good news, the bad news, et cetera?
I can send that out to the full.
Good. The other question I have is, if I'm reading it correctly, the intersection was 4.3 on page 4, and the reimbursements are 4.2. So I'm not sure if that's just rounding, or were you able to shimmy a little bit of money from one side to the other to
It
make
is.
the grand total work, and is that all allowable, et cetera?
It is essentially rounding elements, yes. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Last question, so is it all rounding, or is there some money that found its way to the other side of the ledger?
You know, they will not, it's
That's-
got to be obviously related to the project, so it's definitely rounding issue.
It's definitely rounding.
Yes.
All right, if you could just check on that. And the last question I had was on the last page, the $500,000 estimated from the state for the intersection work.
Right.
Is that, how close is that estimate? I mean, could it come in off, and if so, by how much, maybe, sort of?
It could come in a little under that,
It
I would
could.
think. It's possible, I suppose it could be slightly above it too, but I think it's more likely that, we're talking again within the rounding of $100,000, so if I round up from 50, so it's within 50,000 either way.
So you feel confident that
Yes.
it's within 50K, one
Yes.
way or the other?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Also, I agree with the update. My question is, two questions actually, in terms of the intersection projects, have all the timing kinks on Grassmere been worked out in terms of light timing and?
I know that's an ongoing issue that the engineering department is working with the state, so I don't have more to report on that. I just know that Bill Hurley has been in touch with his counterparts at the state level to adjust timing as needed.
Okay.
I will say on that, I work over that way, and I go through that
I
intersection
do
a
too.
lot, almost every day, if not 2 or 3 times.
Yep.
And it seems to have gotten better in general. I'm waiting less by CVS there than I used to, and it doesn't matter which direction I'm coming from. That seems to, if that's one of the areas that you're talking about, that seems to be generally improved.
I go there regularly myself, and I don't, I mean, maybe part of it is people have become accustomed to the new traffic patterns and the delays or the timing necessary to get through those intersections, but I haven't received any recent complaints with regard to it.
Yeah. There is, I will say, when you, I forget which direction it's coming from, but there is one direction that you come from up Grassmere that the trees are kind of overgrown to the point where it's hard to see when you get to the top of the hill, the no turn on right sign. And that's important because that's a busy turn and it's a tight turn. So we might want to think about, trimming that back so that that sign is front and center.
And the last complaints I had heard were quite a while back. They were actually with people coming down Grassmere headed towards Home Depot. So it was kind of the lineup and the backup there as opposed to on, is it Kings Highway that
Yes.
goes
Yeah.
over? Yeah. So it was that. So if you don't mind, I can also follow up with Bill, but just, that was the one question. The other question is regarding the transfer of the south side land. That land will then be monitored and under the authority of the parking authority?
Well,
Is
it's
that
actually transferred to the town.
to the,
Right.
so the town, the parking authority will not be involved
Yeah.
with?
I
because-
don't know if that decision has been made as of this point, but I can say that the majority of the spaces, parking spaces in question are currently utilized for downtown employee parking. There's a small portion at the end of Sanford Street, which is commuter parking, which I guess that would have to be a discussion that the town would have to make or with regard to that use.
So the process question I have then is, once the quitclaim deed goes through, is it that you meet then with the parking authority and the first selectman and there's a conversation about that? Is that how the process will work?
We've had conversations in the past, but I think they do have to be, those conversations have to be concluded, yes.
Okay. So my comment to add, following my question, is just having passed that or endorsed this plan, that's, another lens that I hope we'll consider as we're looking. I know we have some significant parking needs, but I think there were some.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that at the time the project was conceptualized, there was some understanding, at least from the business community downtown, that there might be some additional parking for either business owners and their employees or the public to utilize for downtown. And so far, we have not really been able to deliver on that commitment. So I do hope that that is part of the conversation as well.
Right, and yes, I agree, because I think there are some very significant parking needs, and I think, again, the hope for me with this plan is that we are also benefiting businesses. So if we're looking at scooters, bicycles, whatever, all the means of transportation that allow people ease of access to our downtown and our train station,
Yeah,
would be great.
just to fill in the blank, we've had discussions with the parking authority about what to do about bikes and setting up bike racks and safe bike racks down in that area.
Yes.
And that's, we've looked at different areas, or different land around there to do that. This is really a trade in parking spaces, for lack of a better term. Mark mentioned the survey. Mark actually had to get out and count the parking spaces and find out how many were full parking spaces versus partial parking spaces. And if everybody's driving Honda Civics, it would help, I guess.
Or compact cars.
Yes. But there was really a trade-off, and we got into this negotiation with the state because there weren't as many spaces at the Metro Center as were in the original documents and plans. So we have kind of negotiated a number of specified spaces. The one lesson that I've learned throughout this entire project, or at least the last 2 years that I've been involved in it, is that everything, when you deal with the state, takes longer than you expect.
That's for sure.
And Mr. Colley, to your point earlier, if it doesn't look like this has changed much in some cases, certainly from our last report to the RTM, it hasn't. And that's not a function of Mark, it's not a function of the town side. It literally is a function of just getting the state people to sign off on things and get them done on a timely basis. So,
We'll say the action list is significantly diminished, so hopefully I won't be appearing before you for too much longer with regard to this project.
That's right.
but again, in summary, just because we hadn't given this board an update in a while, I thought it would be good to update the board so that you have the latest available information on this.
I'll get the other information.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Mark, thank you. Next up, Director of Public Works, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolved that the first selectman be, and hereby is, authorized to negotiate an agreement with Schneider Electric to pay Schneider Electric for the engineering costs associated with the Public Safety Microgrid Grant application out of the proceeds of said grant. And further resolved that the town is not obligated to pay Schneider Electric if said grant is not approved. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Mr. Bowman, can you take us through the grant?
Yes, I can. Basically, as you know, we had submitted a microgrant application that your board approved about a year ago. We got through conditional approval. The second part of the approval is really a full design of the full-blown system, including the interconnection agreement with UI, designing how the system is going to work. Again, I point out there's the existing 50 kW turbine will be upgraded to a 60 kW turbine with a computer adjustment that's actually built into the system. The existing diesel emergency generator will be converted to a natural gas generator. And the reason for that is on a microgrid system, the state wants a 30-day supply of fuel available, uninterrupted supply of fuel, which we can't do with a diesel generator. So we do that with a natural gas generator. All three buildings then have become interconnected for electrical service, so the power can be sent wherever it's needed when UI power is not there. A 20 kW photovoltaic system will be installed on Operation Hope's roof, and a 27 kW photovoltaic generator will be installed on the fire headquarters, and that's from the ZREC program we also submitted. And then the main thing is the state-of-the-art control center will be designed and installed at police headquarters to ensure that the correct amount of electricity is delivered to each facility as needed, and with green power having preference over the emergency generation whenever it's needed. So basically, to do this, it required a design. Now, the way the grant system works is the state pays the town the money for the design of the system. But the way we negotiated with this vendor, he is upfronting all that money. We didn't have to appropriate any money. If the state does not fund it, he doesn't get paid. The state may pay him, even though the application wasn't approved, it may not. But the only money he will get from us is what we get from the state, which we then return back to him. So it's a pretty good deal from the town's point of view. We don't have to appropriate any money. So we're asking here is, in case the state does pay the town for Schneider Electric's cost, that we'll turn around and dispense the money back to Schneider Electric. That's simply that. That's what we're looking for. and that's estimated to be about $50,000. So,
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Thank you again, Mr. Bowman, for being
You're
here
welcome.
and for this work. In the fire emergency generator, the existing diesel one, what happens to that? Where does it go?
We'll put it in a different facility. We'll take it out, and put it somewhere else.
So it just
There's always a
adds,
need for a generator somewhere.
so it essentially will add, hopefully will add to our generator capacity.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds like a good plan.
Any further questions at this point?
Good on this.
Any comments from the public? All right, thank you. Back to the board. Any further questions before we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman, thank you again.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Yep. And while he's leaving the room, I should point out that Mr. Bowman has done a phenomenal job in terms of finding grants to make sure that our not only our efforts in sustainability and green energy move forward, but at minimal cost to the town. Next up, item 9, to hear an update on Penfield Pavilion and a presentation of the reconstruction alternatives. Mr. Michelangelo, if you would.
Yes, Joseph Michelangelo, Director of Public Works. I'm going to give a brief info just to frame a discussion, then I'm going to turn it over to our design professionals to present the alternatives. But just to, as everybody knows, Storm Sandy hit October 29th, did quite a bit of damage to Penfield Pavilion. Our immediate reaction to that was to shore up the foundation so there wasn't any further damage, secure it, fencing, etc. If you recall, probably around January, we received appropriations from all three boards, Selectmen, Finance, and RTM, to do a whole round of capital improvements, $5.2 million worth of damaged facility along the Fairfield shoreline. This was the largest single item. So following that, which was approximate time from January, we went ahead and hired or issued a request for proposal for design consultants to evaluate Penfield Pavilion. And because of the nature of the facility and the damage, a couple of things we were looking for was not just the structural analysis of the building, but also because it's on the shore, a coastal engineer involved for the dynamics of the wave and the flooding action, and also a geotechnical engineer because this obviously has to sit on a proper foundation. So a couple of the goals that we had was, first and foremost, restore the use of what we had at Penfield Pavilion. And our goals were not to do anything more, the same uses, which in essence, a bathhouse, concession, our little assembly hall, meeting room, lockers, decking, etc. So another challenge that we issued to our design team was to figure out why it failed. And obviously we had a big storm, but get into the details why it failed for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want to make the same mistake again. Two, obviously there's monetary damages and insurance issues involved. So there may be, and this has been discussed before, no secret, there may be possible claims going forward against the previous design if that turns up to be an issue. Another thing we want to do in the future is make our building less vulnerable to future storms. We don't want to make the same mistake again, mitigate future storms. So as part of our RFP process, the town selected a consultant, Jose Miguel Albain, who's our lead consultant, who's going to do a presentation here. Part of his team is Peter Cummings, also John Roberts from Race Associates, Heller and Johnson, the geotechnical engineer. On the town side, myself, Bill Hurley, Laura Pooley, Jerry Lombardo, Scott Bartlett was involved. Eileen Kennelly has been in our meetings, as has Kerma, our FEMA consultant. So we're here to provide what I think is a good summary of what we have from here. And then, so I'll turn it over to Jose Miguel at this point, and then following, I assume there'll be a host of questions. Jose Miguel has a PowerPoint, which he's going to flash on this wall. I'm sure there'll be a host of questions. So some of them may be appropriate for our designer. Some of them may be appropriate for myself. So whatever it is. The presentation is going to be a summary of these reports, which I will submit. I don't expect you to read them now. But it's, they're, all the different expertise prepared their own reports on their own different elements, but they're coordinated, so they're bound together. So as the formal document, I'll submit those, but once again, Jose Miguel will talk you through it pretty clearly and concisely, I think.
Just quickly on that, so those are the supporting documents for this PowerPoint,
Yes, they are.
generally?
Correct.
Okay.
Nighttime reading?
People like Jose, you have to speak from the podium now.
Jerry, can we just
I
have,
will.
give him one of these mics?
Huh?
Can we just give
Got a
him,
mic right there.
I know, but,
It's gonna be in the way.
yeah, why don't we just give him one of these mics?
No worries.
You silenced it.
How we done?
Not possible.
Okay.
No, you can speak from here. We hold the mic. While you're there. It's gonna warm up.
Okay.
There you go.
Wheels are turning. Right, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My firm was retained through the RFP 2013-49 to do phase 1, 2 through 4. And I'm going to explain briefly so everybody is on board on that. Basically, the firms that I associated with to do this project are mine, PCI, which is Peter Cummings, the Fairfield resident, coastal engineer Robert Associates, and Pat Crowley from Heller & Johnson, geotechnical engineer. The three associates, they provide reports to supplement our findings. So we're going to go quickly through that. Pretty much, I need like a little bit of room here. Anyway, phase 1, which is what we completed, is the work will include an as-is condition survey of the system building, the structure and the review of the system site conditions, and the conceptual repair plan. We're applying for you a conceptual repair plan about how we're going to approach to bring this building up to code, up to a safe location, or even in the same spot, but that will mitigate any future damage in case we get another storm or a bigger storm than Sandy. That's the purpose of that. Phase 2, which we're going to start as soon as we finish with phase 1, and another little task we're going to show you we are doing, will be the final design restoration. That means we're going to provide construction design documents. The town, per contract, can hire another engineer they want to, so that is there in the contract. But if we are retained, we're going to provide design and construction documents to restore the pavilion to the condition where it should have been from day one. Phase 3 is a review phase of the construction documents, and phase 4 will be construction supervision and administration in case we go forward with the project. So basically the background was that during Sandy, the storm, there was extensive damage done to the building. And that damage placed the building in a position that was unsafe for occupancy. A lot of distortion, a lot of frame movement, and some of that is shown in that pictures there, where you see that footings were undermined completely. They lost complete support underneath. We were called by the town since we were doing some work for them during Irene, where we saw minor scouring. We came and did some work, and we started, and we needed to put some railroad ties as soon as possible in order to prevent further damage. I don't know if you remember, but the week after Sandy, there was another minor storm that came. There was fear that the building might topple because of that. So we, on Saturday of that weekend, with Peter Cummings, Peter, guidance, the people installed these railroad ties underneath several critical footings underneath the gathering room. To go back to Irene, when I show you that's pictures from Irene, we observed during Irene some scarring of the footing. And that's when we realized that the footing were very close to the ground. Nevertheless, during Irene, we did some work, we restored some of the grade, but the storm that came after was too strong for that. In our report, we start with an executive summary. We summarize our findings, in case you don't want to go through the other things that we write afterwards, which is structural analysis. We want to read that, But we give you a summary of what we find. And in that summary, we actually said we're going to comply with your request. And we found out that really, and underlined, the storm, the obvious, flooded the area, inducing severe scouring. Scouring is the removal of soil underneath the footings and exposing several footings due to the moving flood waters, which compromise the bearing capacity of this particular foundation. Therefore, we saw cases where the footing was actually supported by the structure they were supposed to support in the first place. And some of the damage, you can see here, ramps were completely damaged. They're going to have to be rebuilt, all the ramps. This is the floor on the gathering room, the main room. It's completely distorted, warped, because underneath that room, most of the footings were damaged, undermined. We see these footings here are basically around underneath this. We can see that a lot of erosion. Decks were destroyed. Access to the building were destroyed. Stairs and all that. So basically what we want to do, in our professional opinion, I state there in the summary report that the main cause of the foundation failure was originated by the scour around several footings during the storm, together coupled with a lack of adequate embedment of these footings. And that we're going to see a little bit further as I go along. That induced a loss of foundation support. Scour is this picture here in this picture, so you can see if we got soil over here, wave comes and it takes soil away, exposing, in our cases, that line came in many cases below the footing. So you have no support anymore. This is a plan view of the total area of building for the pavilion. We have an existing building area of about 16,800 square feet outlined over here. We have the east wing, the center room, and the west wing. This portion of the east wing was constructed in 2008, while the gathering room and the west wing from this line on was completed in 2011. Total deck area in the back is about 10,000 square feet. Total deck area in the front is about 800 square feet. The total area is about 27,000 square footage of area of building. Now, the compromised foundation that we found in terms of area total about 10,250 square footage of area. The total building was compromised due to foundation failure due to scouring. That's about 38% of the total building complex. And then we put it in terms of the habitable building enclosed, that's almost 50% of that area, a little bit more than that. Here's a clear picture of what we found. We are seeing a bird's eye view of the first floor with foundation. And the shaded area that you see there, that shaded area, basically in the main room and in the west wing, plus some minor localized area in the east wing were undermined. The footings and the support were compromised. So if you can see pictorially there, we're talking close to about 40 to 50% of the total area was compromised due to foundation failure. And that's a little bit review of, summarize of the different area as it's broken down. A area, 9,200, B a little less. The A area really is this portion here. And we found the stream of water running through the underneath the main gathering room, and also here we saw some stream that affected all that area. That's why that portion that was most compromised. Beams and joists, these are the horizontal members that support the structure. The green light area is the beams and joists that may have been compromised. That's the floor structure besides the footing. And we found about 6,000, almost 7,000 square footage of that was damaged and that will need to be reinforced, replaced, or so and so when we do the repair work. Finally, we recommend, and this is in the secretary summary, that the building be raised to an elevation that will comply with the new map that FEMA is going to issue next month in July. For background, the building where it was constructed fell into a Zone A for flood area. Now, Zone A is low velocity wave. Now it's going to go to Zone B, which is high velocity area. And the new elevation that FEMA is going to propose for this site is going to be 13 feet compared to 11 feet previously. Now the difference between A and B, as is described so that you get an idea, the bottom of the beams in the new location have to be at a minimum of 13 feet elevation. The top of the floor in the old location is right now at 11 feet. The top, not the bottom. So the bottom is 8.5. So we're talking roughly raising the building minimum 5 feet from the existing location, with an additional foot that I would recommend for additional safeguard. We're talking about a storm that will occur once every 100 years, in probability 1% in any given year. Those are the probability that we get this type of storm. Not Sandy. Sandy was like a storm, roughly, right, John? Every 70 years. But we decided to 100 years. And we put the freeboard is the distance from the minimum that we got to raise it, another extra foot or 2 foot above it. We may end up in a situation that we may cover a 500-year storm. But the minimum requires 100 years. Nevertheless, this is what we're talking about, raising the building so the bottom of the beams that support the building will be at this elevation over here. No, the BFE, the basic flood elevation, base flood elevation, which will become 13 feet. FEMA recommend freeboard, additional foot or 2 for extra. And I know for fact that insurance company give you extra deduction, extra credit if you go more than the BFE. Something that will be considered in the design. So our objective was to find out for the new regulations, what are the forces involved that we need to design this new foundation. And again, we talk about a 100-year storm, bigger than Sandy. And we got raised, Roberts Associate Coastal Engineer, to do the calculation and the work about the wave loads, the flood loads required for the new foundation. And they provided a report that is on Appendix A on our report, indicating and estimating all those forces, pile wave load calculations, that we will use in the final design to put the new to design the foundation, the new foundation. So we're going to have all these loads acting on the new foundation that's going to be on an elevated building. You're going to see further how that works. And pretty much what we're doing is this. The BFE, which is the base flow elevation, is the elevation of the water as it runs through, and then we got the waves on top of it. And the waves peak at some elevation, and then they crash down into the structure. So if we go to the V zone, the foundation has to be open. It has to be a raised, open foundation. No walls underneath. We can put walls, but there's a special wall called breakaway walls, so that when the wave comes and crash against it, they will break, but they will not hamper the building. It destroyed those very flimsy walls that we put just to cover the bottom and keep things out, but it will flow right through the building. It will not cause the damage that we have seen. That is the goal of raising a building above the base flood elevation, which is, this is the elevation where the wave crest is. That's the 13-foot elevation, where the wave crest is. Now, Robert Associates, they did the water surface variation, and in their report, you can see the 150, the 10 years elevation of the tidal flood and all of that. I'm not going to bore you with these numbers, but we are going to go up to the requirement of FEMA. And this is some of them from the report showing the scour that we might expect during a 100-year storm and how we're going to mitigate that scour. And this is a shot view of what will the new foundation will look like when all is said and done. It's basically going to comprise of a system of grade beams, they call grade beams because they are below grade, that ties the whole building together. And these grade beams are supported by piles. And I'm going to touch why piles. Piles are deep foundation that go down 20, 30 feet to develop the forces that we need. Now, coming up from the grade beam will be concrete columns all the way up to the BFE, the base flood elevation, 13 feet, recommending to put another extra foot, and these are the beams supporting the floor. And these concrete columns will be supported, reinforced, tied down to the grade beam. Now, the BFE is, the minimum is at the top of that concrete column. These beams are bolted to it. Now, when the wave comes, it's going to come right about there, then it's going to crash about here. And this will be designed to take that kind of forces so that the building will not be affected. Oh yeah, we'll be clean up after that, but the building will stand the forces down. What are the forces we need to design this building? Not just the wave, but we got wind also to take care of. All these laws have to come up with a wind. There's always wind, hurricane, flood, they all come together. And then the other forces, the breaking wave, and also impact forces that may come from debris. Maybe something is floating in the flood that may hit the building. And the next one is the hydrodynamic. That is the force of the moving water in part of the structure. So all these forces together with the last one, which is buoyancy, there's a tendency when you submerge anything on water to tend to push it back up. So these are going to be our design for the new foundation. It's going to be completely in accordance to FEMA, completely in accordance to the building code as Connecticut mandates. Helen Johnson, the geotechnical engineer, Pat Crowell is the PE in this project. He's sitting right over there. And he conducted soil testing on the site to find out what was the condition, what is the condition underneath. We're going to put all these foundations. What is down there? And unfortunately, this view here is very light, doesn't show the outline of the building, but it shows all those red marks. These are the 12 boring tests that we took under the supervisional pad to find out what do we got underneath, how deep do we have to go with the piles, what is it? You know, yes, sir.
Just quickly on that, are those borings, can you show me where they're beneath the current structure?
Yes, the outline of the structure, unfortunately, this drawing is not that clear.
Just like on one of the other slides, maybe? Just if you could just point to them?
Here's a blow up of that. Somewhere on the beach side, or on the building, and then overtaking in the parking lot. You're gonna see why.
Oh, this,
Four borings in the
so
parking
there's
lot.
8 of them in the parking lot and 1, 2, 3, 4 on the water side. But nothing right underneath the building?
No, we couldn't because
You can't get to it?
Right.
Okay.
We did 4 in the basement, 4 in the front of the
Thanks.
building. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And the results from those boring reveal something that we were suspecting already. We have some organic layer out there, down there, 2 to 7 feet from the ground. And that organic layer, which is peat and organic silt, we will have to go beyond that with our piles in order to give you a foundation that is strong enough. Remember, we are going to raise the building at least 5 feet. Now, when you raise the building 5 feet, you're adding lever to the sail of the wing. So we're going to have more forces down there. But that's okay. It's a new foundation. We're going to be able to take those forces. So that's why we recommended to do the soil testing, so that we know how deep we gotta go with our piles. And one of the things that Pat and his group recommended was, one type of pile is a micro pile, which is a encased steel pile with concrete and a rebar, and that will go all the way down 20 to 30 feet. This particular recommendation, and I'm maybe going ahead of me, but we got two options for you to decide. One is to raise the building where it is, drag this type of pile, or, we're gonna talk more about it, move the building toward the parking lot. So there will be two options, and all the pros and cons will be debated down the road, but technically, both of them are doable, and we are working with insurance company, your insurance company, in terms of cost to find out what is more economical, what they will cover, what are all the ingredients that will make either option acceptable to the town. If we move it to the parking lot, we will use timber pile. They're not cheaper than the other one, but there's always a trade-off about either one. So all that we will provide in due time, which will be the best, but this will be the suitable pile if we move the building to the parking lot. Another type of pile that we can use is the helical pile. The disadvantage of this one is good to work underneath the building. If we raise the building, we can work underneath. We don't get as much capacity as the other ones, so we have to put more of these. So that would be something that we will consider in our analysis. The architectural and structural design that we did in the report talk about the two optional locations. The first one, we take the building where it is, we raise it up, and we build this foundation underneath that we're talking about. The other one is we move the building north to the existing parking lot. Before we want to have all the data, all the information, for the town to make that decision. All the economics, all the pricing, we are going to be working on that. This is an overall shot of the whole building in perspective. The main gathering room, the east wing and the west wing. The building is about 85 by 385 feet in dimension. We got about 244 individual footings right now underneath this building. It's a one-story building, but it's extensive in its plan dimension. And this is just a preliminary view of what we're talking about. The red line is if we move it back, and the other line is where it is right now. 30 feet setback. So we're saying if we move it back, one advantage will be you get a lot of beach now. Beach becomes bigger. And other stuff. Disadvantages, you lose parking spaces. We are trying to, if we move it to the parking lot, to eliminate columns so that you can park underneath the building. That's one of the idea that we are floating. So if you lose some parking space, we're going to gain some. We're not going to lose the whole parking lot. I mean, those are things that are in the preliminary stage. We're not there yet to say which one is the way to go. And of course, the town will make that decision. We will provide all the data for you to make that decision, not only technical, but economic in terms of costs. This is the gathering room, and here we found lots of damage. And the decking or the finished floor will have to be removed completely in this room. The building is distorted because of the loss of foundation, and we're going to have to unbolt most of those trusses. And when we liften them, we may have to do partially the roof because it's so distorted, and then plumb it back when we put it on top of the new foundation. So this room, which is, I would say, the focus point of the complex, will have to be worked on. But the good news is that most of the structural framing in this room is good. It could be used again. You don't have to replace it. It's the floor system, we need to work on that. Here's a shot view of the east wing and all the foundation that is there. Those little circles with the little wing on that, those are piles. Piles that need to be installed underneath this footing. And you can see here, all these gray lines you see there, those are gray beams that are going to be under the ground and supported by these piles. Total number of piles and we have estimated for 231 piles right now. 88 in the east wing and 143 in the gathering room and the west wing. That is to provide a foundation that will support the building, elevating and everything. If we go to the parking lot, we're going to try to eliminate a row of these columns in order for people to be able to park underneath. That's one of the ideas that we have in mind. This is the west wing and the gathering room, and there's tons of piles. We can't put this foundation back where it was. It's impossible. It will be inviting disaster. We got to go down. We got to go down, and we got to raise the building. That is a given right now at this point. And I'm just giving you an overall view on a conceptual design. What will it take to raise this building? It's a lot of work, but it's doable. Here's again some of the pictures that I showed before. Concrete column, gray beam pile. The building is up here. This is using micro pile if we keep the building where it is. This is using timber pile if we move the building to the parking lot. So we got some conceptual design already worked out, and we have already engaged a construction company to estimate the cost of doing this. Then we are going to have a meeting with the town representatives that are dealing with us in terms of cost. Option A, option B, what are the differences? We're also in touch with the insurance company. They're on board, and we are trying to find a medium where everybody will be satisfied with whatever solution we come up with. Here's some more detail. This is just for information purpose only. How the foundation will look, the gray beam, the column on top, some of the connections that we're going to have to do in the gathering room. We are considering putting a steel beam instead of a glue lam, which is a glue laminated timber structure, because we want to span most of the gathering room. Instead of having two supports in the building, we're going to have only one, which also will help in future flood. So our general structure recommendation, which is at the back of the report, section 6, talks about the following: roof, wall, and floor framing. This is the skin, the floor, and all, and the height of the building. We're going to say the repair and the reinforcement or replacement of any damaged member will be done on a one-to-one basis. What that means is, we find a piece of beam destroyed or damaged, we're going to replace it with another one just like that. We don't need to do any super-duper evaluation to that. The building as designed from the foundation up is adequate. The beam sizes, the joist sizes, the roof trusses, they're all fine. It's the foundation the problem. So we will do a one-to-one replacement. When we put the building back in the new foundation, we will do a complete inspection of everything and retighten and reinforce everything, because the building is going to crack as we move it. Things are going to get loosened up. Also, we're going to provide remedial design for any components that we find that is non-conforming. Hurricane ties may not be placed in the right location. We're going to put it in the right location this time. So it'll be a complete inspection once the building is set on its foundation. We're going to resurface all interior walls that have been damaged. Replace the deep board, The interior walls that are rotten and cracked, they're going to have to be replaced once the building is plumb on its foundation. When everything is plumb, everything has to be resurfaced. We got to relocate all the utilities above the base flood elevation. All utilities have to come up with the building. Nothing can stay below the base flood elevation. We're going to redesign the floor system of the gathering room and the adjacent area as required for a more efficient design. When I say efficient design, I mean get rid of some of those columns if we have to. Allow the water to flow more freely underneath, because we are going to have another storm. A 100-year storm has a 26% possibility of happening within 30 years. So that's a given. We live next to the sea, storm will come. Design additional steel beam to use, and that's just part of the technical stuff. We're going to have to rebuild all the ramps, stairs, and means of egress. The building is going up. We don't want a building sticking up over there. We have to work with our coastal engineer, with geotechnical to blend the building and period of the architect so that everything flows and build dunes, so it won't look like it's stick in the mud, out there. It has to blend with the environment. That's part of the charge and design later on. And provide additional new dune for protection and a smooth transition from the new building to the beach. You don't want to have to go 5 stairs to get to the beach. It's going to be a smooth transition. We already have some conception. This is what it is today. That's where the building is. And then it's going to look like that. We're going to raise the building up. This is the bulkhead right now. We're going to cover the bulkhead. So when we come from the building, we're going to transition into the beach. That's some of the ideas. So I don't want you to think that we're going to put a building up there. Then, whoa, how are we going to get to the beach from the building? No, there will be access to it. We're going to have a smooth transition that blends with the beach area and everything else. That is the idea. Not just put a building and then to go there, we got to climb 20 stories and come back down. No, we don't want that. Anyway, this is the final conclusion in our report. We believe, the failure of the foundation was as the storm went through the area, resulting in undermining of the footing. As the water recessed back to the sea, it took a whole lot of sand and soil with it, undermining the footing, leading to the foundation failure. And this is some of the picture there. And just to give you an idea where we are right now, we are completing phase 1 right now. The next phase is to do the actual construction design of it. But in the meantime, we have the task of estimating cost for the insurance company, for the town, so that we got those 3 options. Now, those 3 options, I'm going to explain briefly. The insurance want us to give them a construction estimate, how much it would take to put the building back as it was. We know we can't put it back as it was, but they need a baseline for cost. So how much it costs to put it back where it was and how it was. So we're working on that, to give them that number. That's the baseline. Now the next 2 options are restore the building pre-signing in the exact location where it is. The third is relocate the pavilion complex to the north, to the parking lot location. And we are working now in this area here. Our goal is to complete this by July 11th. We're having a meeting. We're going to have all these prices, give it to the town, and then it will be in the town court to decide where you want the building, where it is, or in the parking lot, with all the things that go with it. And then once we get the charge for that, we will design it either way. And that will be all for this quick presentation. Thanks for coming in. We take any questions right now if you have any question from
Excuse me,
the board.
the board will address that, but Joe, did you have any final comments or?
One of them, a question that I was been asked, not for Jose Miguel on the spot. The question that I've been asked many times in the beginning was the original building design to code. So you spoke about the inadequacy of the foundations
Thanks,
deal with
Jerry.
Scout.
Cut to the chase.
To put you on the spot, is that a, what was your response to that?
What we found out was that the foundation, the footings, were not deep enough into the ground. Now, we also found out that there was no soil testing that was done on the site. And the engineers, they knew that there were organic material down there. They tried to remove some of those, and they did. And the decision was made somewhere in the design process not to put the footing where it should have been. Per code is 3 foot 6 from the ground to the bottom of the footing. But in the coastal area, you gotta go deeper. In the coastal area, there are always recommendations to go deeper because FEMA recognizes, and everybody who knows about flood, that when flood comes, it takes soil away. And for some reason, I don't know why, I gotta be frank, that was not considered. And the footings, in my opinion, were shallowly placed. And they should have been, if we want to play quarterback 2020 vision, by all means, even on the zone A, which is the zone where the building was when it was designed and constructed, low velocity, still Cascado, you still gotta put it further down. So, to answer the question shortly, the footing should have been deeper. Why they didn't get deeper? I cannot answer that. If I were an independent reviewer when that thing was done, I look at it, that's one question I would have had. I said, guys, the sea is 50 feet away. Don't you think we gotta go down? Anyway. Did that answer?
Yes. Now, as far as our next steps for the project, as Jose Miguel said, we'll be developing these for the different alternatives further, working with the insurance, town's insurance carrier. An obvious next step is to go to the Park and Recreation Commission. They had their June meeting earlier this month. They're not meeting, I believe, for another 4 weeks, so we may be presenting a special meeting or wait till that date. But once again, they will have a large part of the decision whether the building, what's their preference as far as the location of the building and the elevation of the building. As Jose Miguel said, we're tied to a certain elevation, but we may want to get a foot more, we might want to get another foot more. So they'll play an important part in that decision process because of the use of the building and the visual of the building and a few other things. Planning and zoning will be involved in some form, more so if it gets moved forward than if it raises in place. So that's another obvious board that will come into play. As far as the involvement of the other boards, as I mentioned, we did have a original capital appropriation for this work, whether that is sufficient or not, and we have to amend that. Once again, we are covered for everything over 500,000. So not counting the net, the total, if the total aggregate goes over our appropriation, we may be seeking it even though it won't be out of pocket, but we'll go down that road as we get cost numbers developed.
All right. One, thank you very much and appreciate the PowerPoint slides. And a couple questions just to kick things off. Joe, at some point we'll discuss whether we'd have a peer review on this, in essence, a second opinion. Can you tell us where that stands and what's the approach?
Yes, we do plan to have a peer review, secondary review of that. So basically, we'll issue an RFP for that, and it'll be a mini version of the previous RFP that we issued for the same type of evaluation. And once again, I don't think we're ready for that stage yet. We're probably a month away from that, because once again, they would review specific elements of the design, the type of footings, whether they're when we were ready to say they're 20 or 30 feet deep, when we're ready to say the elements are going to be 18 by 18 and it's going to be a 24-inch beam. Those are the type of things that review. So we haven't gotten them on board yet, but we're not ready for them to be injected at this point, but we will go through that process.
Okay, and again, as we talk, the purpose of that is to make sure that as we rebuild it this time, we get it done right. So much like for any major surgery, you'd get a second medical opinion. We're just getting a second engineering opinion on that, and I believe that's a fairly standard practice in something like this.
Correct. As we approach construction projects at this level, it is this is the amount where you start getting peer reviews of different designs.
Right. And again, just going back to the presentation, just to be clear, a couple things have happened since this was originally designed. One is that the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA have kind of redrawn the flood zones and maps. So if nothing else changed, the additional height requirements have come into play. And if I heard you correctly, in addition, this was a flood zone A, and it's now, in the new maps, a flood zone B. So the zone has changed, and so there are additional requirements or restrictions because of the zone change, as well as just the incremental change in the FEMA flood heights. Is that correct? Is that,
Yeah.
all right. You were talking about the overall structure. When you net all that out, the building from where it was is going to be raised 5 to 6 feet?
Yes.
All right. Does that mean that the roof, that the structure, basically the entire building will go up 5 to 6 feet?
Yes.
Okay. Have we had any discussion about what the impact is on the flooding in the neighborhood? One of the
Yeah.
concerns was, in this case, that a lot of the water came through under the building as it stood. If we raise it up 5 or 6 feet, is that going to create the opportunity for even more water to come through faster into the neighborhood? And is that going to complicate the flooding problem in the neighborhood right behind that?
We are going to address that in the final design, and we have the coastal engineer already on board on that. The flood is going to be, the building is not going to stop the flood. I mean, the new design is not going to stop it. It's going to flood, it's going to flood. The question is, will the building make it worse? Well, the building wasn't there to make it better, the flood, but we will do mitigation analysis where John and his group will provide the best we can within what we have in order to minimize flood everywhere, but we can't guarantee that.
And it's in your packet too, and it was Jose's slides. If you look at like where the bulkhead wooden wall is there now, well, in his detail, what he had is earth or sand going to a higher level over that existing wooden bulkhead wall. So not only the bulkhead wall will stay in place, there'll be boulders placed around that concrete wall, and there'll be sand placed above that. And not only will that be there, we plan to make it continuous further to the right or the left. So, as part of the schematic design, the protection on the south side will be greater than it is now.
One of the questions on the bulkhead was because at the prior elevation, there were cutaways or cutouts in the bulkhead where boards were placed for the storm. Those boards got undermined and moved out, and that created a certain channeling of the water, if you will, to potentially a fire hose effect with the water coming through that, which potentially scoured the foundation and by theory, and I don't mean to sound like an engineer too much here. If you replace that bulkhead, we'll be able to close in those and have the sand up over it without, in essence, creating a much bigger berm, for lack of a better term, that would help with some of the flood protection. And
I'm going to put that question to John. John, can you answer that?
I think the shortest answer.
if you could, sir, come to the podium so the folks at home can hear you, and if you'd be kind enough to identify yourself.
My name is John Roberge, I'm principal of Roberge Associates, coastal engineers. We're specialists in marine engineering, coastal processes, beach mechanics. So we get the whole thing about beaches and waves. It would be short-sighted to not retain that bulkhead, if that was part of your question. I think it's important that that be a continuous structure, that there be no potential breaches. Your observation of the jetting effect it was real, and that was a critical component to the failure of the foundations. We would very strongly recommend that be eliminated. I think we have the opportunity for relatively low cost as part of the whole project to reconstruct a dune-like structure, dune-like system that will contribute mightily to flood protection of the neighborhood. At least flooding that originates from the Long Island Sound side and wave-driven. So we feel it's as Joe implied, it's an important part of the whole project.
All right, thank you. We talked about the piles going down, and I heard a couple different numbers, but 20, 30, as much as 40 feet potentially.
Right now, we have impacting sustain on that 20 to 30 feet, somewhere in that range. Right,
Okay, and we-
Correct.
yeah.
20
And
to 30 feet.
And if I listened correctly here, you also did the test holes to
Yes.
make sure that you understood what the substructure was going down that deep, and we're confident that going down that deep is enough, A, and B, we can get down there in order to support the structure.
Yes.
Believe so.
Yeah, the organic soils extend down to about elevation -2, -3, which is roughly 10 to 12 feet below existing grade at deepest, so the piles will be below the bottom of the organic layer.
And then, Joe, and probably another, not quite off topic, but is not perhaps a structural question. One of the decision steps we went through early on was how we got ADA access to the earlier facility. If we're raising this up, does that complicate the ADA access problem, and what are the thoughts or design considerations going forward with ADA access?
Because our parking area is much lower as it is now than the building will be, where they have now a series of switchbacks, there would literally have to be longer ramps and more turns, so to speak. One of the options that we're considering is elevating the area, if you're looking at it from here, elevating the area either to the right or to the left, so that a car that pulls in there that parks, which you don't need to be at a different grade, the car could be parked higher than it is right now, if you could picture that. A parking lot could be raised in one area there. So if the building is raised 5 feet and where the handicap spots are 5 feet, you have the same differentiation you have now between the where you park your car and where you access the first floor of the building. And that even puts you in better position to get to the beach, because you won't have to traverse the big wall and the playground and a few other areas. So yeah, that is one of the goals. Obviously, the building has to be handicap accessible, and as you may or may not know, the Sandy playground that was approved a couple weeks ago, one of the criteria of that is that's a handicap playground also. So one of the challenges to these gentlemen is, yes, we need handicap access to the building, to the beach, and our new play area also. So that's part of the outside design that'll be incorporated in the site. Not only we talked about the beachside front grading, there's also going to be some street side grading also, not just to accommodate handicap things, but also to screen the building, so you're not looking at what looks like a parking garage from Fairfield Beach Road looking towards the building.
Okay, thank you. I don't mean to put you on the spot for the ADA access points now, but as you work through this, I think that'll be one of those areas for a lot of additional questions and concerns to make sure that's addressed. Those are my start-off questions. Thank you for being patient and let me get through that. Would either of you like to start?
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, gentlemen. Hey, Mr. Michelangelo, can you refresh me back on the allocation in January for this project? What was the allocation that we approved for this project?
The allocation we approved for this project was $1 million out of the $5.2 million.
It was $1 million.
Yep, but one of the ways we configured, and this was open part of the discussion, one of the ways we configured that is we realized that some would be high, some would be low. So the aggregate of 5.2 was approved. So not every project has to come on the money, but for our 24 different projects, we have 5.2 million. This one was targeted or estimated at $1 million.
Okay. And was the rationale for the $1 million equivalent to an insurance deductible, or what was the rationale for the $1 million? I just don't recall.
The rationale on that one was, it was a very crude estimate based on very little engineering evaluation at that time.
Okay. What is the insurance deductible for the town on a claim like this?
On this building, it's $500,000.
Okay, so the $1 million exceeds it no matter how you look at it.
Correct, yes.
Okay. So sticking with the insurance theme for a couple moments, on this project, much like when you have a car accident, do you fix it or do you total it, right? How is this being viewed from our perspective on the fix it versus tear it down, replace it perspective, and how is the insurance company viewing those two possibilities or those two outcomes, and what can you tell us about that process?
What the insurance company, and I'll say what they owe us, maybe that's not the best word, is we're eligible to get a reconstructed building exactly as we have to code. And because code is now much higher than it was, well, when we do our calculations of construction estimates, what it costs to raise whatever a square footage of the building is down there to elevation 14, when our construction estimators crunch the numbers, when they're crunch the numbers, wherever that comes out to be, and maybe you meet in the middle, but that's what we're entitled to. And we, as far as my knowledge of the insurance, yes, we can, have them cut a check and walk away, as far as my knowledge of it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that obligates us
Let me
to.
ask
I
you-
think rather than getting too far into the insurance, it was mentioned during the presentation that Eileen Kennelly, who's our risk manager, sat in on those, and the company who sat with him is Kerma,
Sure.
which is the company that handles our insurance.
Sure. All right, so with that said, I am going somewhere with this, and I'm certainly sensitive to that. Whose decision ultimately is it, whether because I heard tonight there's a couple of proposals. We're going to fix the building, we're going to move the building, we're going to not move the building, but we're going to do all this kind of work. And I'm not an engineer or a construction expert, but just by viewing all the stuff I've looked at, between all the underwork, all the pilings, all the interior work, not to mention putting a building 5 or 6 feet taller, which is now 5 or 6 feet taller for the neighbors to look over. It looks to me like it's, almost at a place where there's enough work being done to potentially rationalize just doing it over. So who ultimately makes the decision? We fix it, we repair it, we do all this stuff, or we take it down and build something equivalent that might be better, smarter, newer, safer, might be aesthetically more pleasing, is something that gets built one time versus getting cobbled together. Now, it's a beautiful building, I'm not talking about that, but we did build that within the framework of what we used to have there. We had to kind of piece it together. We did the east wing, and then we did the center and the west wing, and they did a beautiful job, and it looked nice when we were done. But something tells me if we had a flat piece of sand, we might have done something different, whether it was aesthetically or whether it was from an engineering perspective or even from the amenities that the building possibly offered. So I have to ask myself, if we have to go do all of this stuff and spend all of this money, and we're going to get a lot of money back from an insurance company claim, potentially one way or the other, why are we married to the idea of this route versus taking it down?
Yeah, I think before we go to Kristen, let me just clarify. The charge to Mr. Michelangelo was to identify what happened, all right, and identify the cost and the options for going forward.
Okay.
Once that's collected, I think you're raising a very good question.
Okay.
And I think that should be one of our constant themes. That may impact the reimbursement, that may impact the there are a number of cost factors
Right.
that may impact that.
Right.
How much we do or partially we do, but I think once we know what happened, what it costs to fix it, what the approach will be, then I think that's a very appropriate time to have just that conversation.
Okay. So I'm a bit ahead of myself on that.
No, I think it's good you brought it up. I don't
Okay.
want me to say that.
Okay.
May I piggyback on your
Please,
question?
yeah.
Because I think you've asked a question, but I actually wondered if before Mr. Michelangelo answered, and Mr. Albane, I'm sorry. The question about would you tear it down versus try and fix it, move it, whatever. Is that part of your analysis as you, in terms of the costing out the pieces, is that okay?
Oh, yeah,
Because it
'cause
ties
that's
into what you
absolutely.
were asking. So is that, yes, for
definitely.
you?
Oh,
And then
okay.
maybe Mr. Michelangelo could follow up, because I think the other thing that Selectman Kylie asked about, which I would also like to have more conversation about, is those process pieces, so.
Obviously,
Selectman.
sorry. Obviously, that option is always available,
Right.
which is tear it down, start from scratch. The question was, to us, is what will it take to make this building safe? And we know how to do that.
So fix
Now-
it.
This is right, fix it. Now,
Okay, you got it.
if we go the other route, let's say, and maybe we end up there, tear it down, build a new one. Then at that point, it has to be decided, how's it gonna look, how's it gonna be? There'll be other issues that's gonna open up, that it's not gonna be, it's gonna be cutting it close, let's say, in time-wise, for the next season, probably. So, there's a lot of factors here that are playing, but I understand completely
What I'm asking.
Yes, I mean, it costs a little bit more because you gotta demolish the building, take it down, haul it off, do a brand new one, and by that time, everybody will say, why don't we do a little different this way or that way? It's a completely new design then. Doable? Yeah, it will have to be the same thing. Coming up, same type of foundation, that doesn't
Right,
change.
that stuff wouldn't
Right,
change,
right.
but, right.
But, you know, your question is completely valid. We haven't gotten there,
Okay.
you know,
Alright.
charge.
And I just didn't, the other part of it was, and we can get an answer to it later, because Mr. Tetro explained the insurance process, is, you know, is there a different potential reimbursement depending on which road we go down?
Exactly.
Much like when you fix your car, do you get totaled or you fix it? And I don't know whether any of that applies, and I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, and we will post that question because we're working, Peter.
Okay.
It's working, come on, Peter.
And
Let's, Peter,
I-
shed some more light.
I agree, it's probably not appropriate to have a detailed insurance reimbursement conversation, so.
Peter, by the way, Peter Cummings working with insurance very close.
Okay.
Yeah, Peter Cummings, Inc. That's a great question. The evaluation, 28 years of us being in business together, the building is a sound structure. The real problem is the foundation level. So if you can imagine this, if you just draw a line from the floor system up, when we rectify the building, yes, there's massage, it's got to come back together, we have to alter a few things. But it's the foundation that's really your cost. So if you were to take away that building, you are just really, you can never get to just fixing the foundation. You're going to exceed your costs astronomically. Because the building, I think, was just the west wing was 3.375. The whole building was 5.5. It's a valuable. There's value in the structure. The great room has issues. There's some issues when the building gets lifted. It's going to it'll settle itself out. The main cost, as Jose Miguel has gone through, it's your foundation cost. So whatever, I think where we're at, and back to cost,
Right.
which is if we build a brand new foundation in the parking lot, now we're back to new construction. We get in there, we can do it right, there's nothing in our way, and we can put this back. Then the building gets lifted up, slid back, and we're done. Now, we have all of these footings and foundation piers, which we've been discussing, would then get moved to that bulkhead that John wants to put back. So we're actually going to take the parts that are no longer good and actually reuse them. So you're getting a lot of value out of the fix. It's a question of, and I think even like Joe says, you're going to get to the numbers, and you're going to get to Z very quickly. That the structure, it's a value. It has a lot. Its integrity's there, and I think I don't know because there's a lot of people. It's the public. We don't need to have people say, "Oh, rip it down," because we don't need to. To really
And
answer.
I'm not suggesting I know that we should or shouldn't do that. I just didn't hear anything about that, so I was concerned that wasn't considered at least yet. And, much like any project you go into, even small things for your home, I just get concerned about, in general, like you're lifting a building, you're talking about plumbing everything, because it's all over the place. And, you can just begin to run into thing after thing after thing that needs to be repaired or replaced along the way. And I don't know how quickly that stuff can escalate, that the two numbers, considering how far they are apart to start with, that gap begins to close. And you get to the end of the project and you're like, maybe we could have done it the other way. So I guess we'll have to wait and see the numbers, is the real answer. Okay. Thank you.
Did you have any?
Well, I just to follow up on the process question, this is why you have a board, because we each have our unique perspectives,
Right.
engineering, finance, and Selectman Kiley also touched on process. Mr. Michelangelo, I heard you saying that the next stop would be Parks and Rec. Who made the determination that that's how the approval process would go in terms of moving forward? Is that just because
Let
they're-
me just
can you-
clarify, that's not the approval process. We need to
Okay.
bring it to Parks and Rec. They need to know what's going on, they need to understand this. Their input is very important. But they are not the final decision makers in terms
Okay.
of what we're doing and how we're building this.
So then maybe my question was to the first selectman,
Yes.
really, because what I heard it differently. So thank you for the clarification, because that was certainly I agree. Obviously, Parks and Rec has a big involvement with this building and jurisdiction in the end as it's constructed. But thinking back to kind of the beginnings of this project, and I was on the RTM, and the conversations that happened at the RTM level then led to the formation of a building committee in order to be able to try and open up that conversation. So thank you, because I think that goes back to what Selectman Kiley said, that there are some significant conversations that need to happen here. And I think it's important that certainly it happens here and with the other elected town bodies, and I appreciate that.
I think to touch on where we are, this is the first presentation we've had back before this board on the project and the depth, if you will, of the issues with this.
No pun.
Initially, there were some, is it just a foundation problem? You just push everything up, shore in the foundation, hey, we're back in business. How long does that take? What's involved? I think it's been pointed out there's some significant issues there. I think because of the significance of those issues, some of the decision questions that may not have been on the first page in January are now certainly on the first page in terms of how we go forward. I think the decision process is now more significant. This is more than just a maintenance and repair project. Going back to Irene, where there was some maintenance and repair done to the pavilion, that was handled fairly readily. So I think we want to rethink through the decision process here and what we have to do. And again, I wouldn't put Mr. Michelangelo on the spot for that. I think that's something that certainly the three of us will have input to as we move forward from here.
That's fair.
But now we've got a better understanding of the complexity of the project moving forward than we did yesterday. So.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Well, and yes, thank you. It's true. I think there's a lot to take in here, and even more to take in right here. And I'm grateful for that, though certainly a lot of this is not my expertise, but at least there's certainly a lot of basic level understanding that I can gain from this. I think, again, this is our first conversation, but what is occurring to me is kind of the question of timing and process and the idea of potentially a building committee involvement with this. And that may complicate things, but I know this is in the very initial phases, and we haven't had much conversation. I just raised that here now because particularly it was just raised. I know many residents that I talk to have questions on all sides of this issue, and share their opinions, but certainly a lot of people are wondering what the status is, so I don't know.
That was the reason for having this update.
Yes.
In terms of the status. And again, in terms of the process, initially, when it was looked at as kind of $1 million project and some basic shoring up of the foundation, that is conceptually a much simpler process than perhaps we're going through now. So I think that it's important to get this before Parks and Rec to get their input, get their understanding, and have their feedback as part of this. As to whether we use a building committee or not, I think that's something we want to look at over the next few weeks.
Sure.
And take a second look at that. Initially, it may not have been defined as well or as completely. Looking at this, we may have it, but just to be clear, time frame is not a consideration. What's a consideration is getting this done right so it lasts. If it's as soon as we can get it available, we want it available, but we're not rushing through this to make it available for any specific date or time. So whatever it takes to do it right, we're going to do that.
And I could not agree more about that. I think that certainly people are eager, those who enjoy using the facility, but I do agree completely. We need to make sure that we do this well, do it right, and have a process that allows for the conversations that need to happen. So I appreciate you all being here today. It was a very thorough presentation and the opportunity to have this conversation as well.
No, thank you very much.
All right. Joe, you talked about going before Parks and Rec. Did we plan on having any presentations for any of the neighborhood groups so they can get a better feel for what's going on? Did you do one before flood and erosion control already? Or was that on?
No, we invited, the chairman of the Flooding Erosion Board was invited to our updated meeting last week, so he has seen this meeting.
Okay, which meeting were you? which meeting last week did you make this presentation?
It was only, it was an internal staff meeting between
Okay.
the town staff and our consultants, and we invited the chairman of the Fairfield Beach Road Association and the chairman of the Flood and Erosion Control Board, just to get some, to get them on board with it.
Let's talk about that process offline, given we have some time while we're presenting it to Parks and Rec. It might be good to update some of the neighborhood groups so they, given the magnitude of what we're talking about here and what the impact is. All right. Any further questions from the board?
Can I just ask one quick construction question? You touched on a couple of things when you were talking about the piers.
Right.
Are the ones that are under the current building, I think you said there was 140 of them? or
244.
244?
Right.
They all go down. Are they connected to one another, or are they
No.
all independent?
They're all independent, except for the gathering room, where you have the big steel columns.
Uh-huh.
They are tied together by a wall that was constructed for the shear panels. But most of the other piers, let's say, they're individually, they're not connected.
Does it make sense from a construction perspective to have them connected at
If the
to each
so-
other to provide additional strength, or does that not make sense?
Well, if the soil is good and you don't have to go that deep, you don't have to connect to them. In the case that we have here, we need to connect to them to give them lateral stability.
Well, that's my question.
Right.
And your proposal, no matter what it is we've seen, is to have them connected?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I just want to be clear on
Right.
that. So those were not, and these would be?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And I think you referenced, I'm going to call them below-grade concrete beams.
A grade beam, right.
Okay, that would in fact be
That's
that
the one.
support or connection.
Okay.
Then you saw the beam columns up above that. But you had the pilings,
Yep,
you had the below-grade beams.
right.
Exactly.
Right, and that gives you that lateral strength that you just referred to in addition to the vertical strength.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
If you
Thank
do, just as a side, if you do individual,
yeah.
if you got individual ones, you can do it, but then you need 3 piles or 4 per, which is it's an outrageous number, so we're gonna connect to them. Nothing.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Joe, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your
You're welcome.
presentation.
No, thank you. Appreciate the information.
Okay. You don't mind if I dismantle my stuff?
Take your time. Take your time. All right, and certainly if any other questions pop up as you're
Yeah.
going through, if you could channel those back, we'll make sure we get those either answered quickly or addressed in a future update so that we stay fully informed on this process.
Is there any way we can get some of this, some of these drawings are big, I was gonna say soft copy for some of this, but we can take it offline with Kathleen. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Next up, to review, modify, and approve the Fair TV operational committee charge.
No questions from the public?
Yeah, generally, we don't at updates like this. How many folks would like to ask questions? All right. Given that the magnitude and importance of this, if you'll come up, kind of, who'd like to go first?
I'll go first.
Sir?
My name is George McCluskey, Eunice Avenue. You started the process, the questions that you were asking were very interesting. And how does the process work? It goes to Park and Rec. Who has the final say as to what happens, where the building would be? Because just listening to it, from a common sense point of view, I do construction for the company I work for. It would seem that if we're going to do anything, collect a nice big fat check, make the building about half the size it is, move it into the parking lot so that you have bathrooms, showers, a little place for the people to have a gathering, and then build a nice berm in front of it like the people were talking about, so that the houses in back of it don't get flooded, or at least the potential of them getting flooded is a lot less than it is now.
Let's clarify the ground rules. Normally, when we do an update, there is no public comment, all right? When there is public comment, it's public comment as opposed to question and answer, all right? However, just to clarify where we are with that, those are all good questions. I think Mr. Kiley kicked off that discussion, followed by Ms. McCarthy-Vahey, and we will clarify that process and get that information out to the public. And as I talked to Mr. Michelangelo earlier, actually do some public sessions on this, so that would be an appropriate time to ask those questions. We want to get that information out. We're just not going to take the time at this session to do that because, frankly, given this update, there's a lot more complexity involved in this project than
than it was originally.
What you
thought.
heard for the first, I don't know if you heard this for the first time, realize this board heard that presentation for the first time. So we have a much clearer understanding. The charge for this board, and specifically myself in particular, is to make sure that we follow a good process from here, and we do what's right for the town in the long term.
Okay. So you'll get some information out to all of us as we go on.
Very much so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I just had a
If you please just come up to the podium, please identify yourself and your
Yeah.
address, and
Kristen Robinson. I should be living at 218 Puritan Road. I'm not currently. I was very happy at the very tail end of that presentation to hear speaking of the berm. We moved here 25 years ago, and the berm had just been completed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and we do see how effective that has been. And I can't stress enough the importance. I know it's not a 100% deal, but yes, you have a pavilion and it's a public structure, but at the other hand, you have a large group of people that have really been impacted by this ever since we lifted Penfield up to do the work. So I really urge you, don't forget the fact that we need to prevent water incursion as much as possible into that beach area neighborhood. I really do.
Yep, no, thank you. And Mr. Michelangelo is in fact reviewing kind of the flooding, what happened, what took place, looking at what we can do from a mitigation standpoint. He and I joined him, even went down to Stanford to look at the diking system they have, the pumping stations, how they set it up. When you have $1 billion to spend, what you can do.
Hey.
We don't quite have that much, but we can learn from what they've
Right.
done. So that is another initiative that's in process of
Good.
going along also.
I'm very glad to hear that, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other public comment? And again, just your name and address, if you'd be so kind.
Yes, I'm Dick Mahusky. I live on Colonial Drive. I will hold all my comments and questions based on your representation that we will have informatory discussions with the people in the immediate beach area, or as I have come to call it, the basin. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And again, given the complexity of what's involved, that seems very appropriate in terms of what we're doing. Go right ahead.
I just wanted to re-emphasize what First Selectman Tetro said. We just got this document this week, and I myself was only able to look at it this afternoon, and this is the first presentation. It's our first conversation, and I'm finding it's a lot to take in. And I'm sure that I and all of us as Board of Selectmen members will continue to ask and have a lot of questions, and I will speak for myself in saying the process, as I questioned here, is an important question, and that is very much, as you heard the First Selectman and Selectman Kiley say, part of our responsibility. And so, again, yes, this is another new level of information for us, just recent. So there are a lot more conversations that will happen.
Any other comments from the public?
I have one question. Mr. Kiley brought this up. Will copies of this complete formal presentation document that the town has paid for, will that be available to the general public in some format, like a PDF document or something?
Yeah. Traditionally, when we get backup documents like this, we get to put them on the website. I'm not sure, based on this, if this is all compatible to do that, but as much as we can get, I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, but as much as we can get on the website, we will, and if it doesn't all fit, we will make arrangements for another way to get it out. But that is also part of our custom and process, to make sure the public has all the information that this board sees.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comments? All right. Thank you all. Thank you for your listening and your patience, and we will get this presentation out to the public as soon as reasonable.
Thank you for allowing me public comment.
You're welcome. All right. Next up, CT Rides. To hear, consider, and act upon the following Oh, sorry.
You tried that one.
Nope. Fair TV Operational Committee, I thought I'd started that already. To review, modify, and approve the Fair TV Operational Committee charge approved by the Board of Selectmen November 14th, 2012. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second? All right. It's now before us. Frankly, you two all sat in on the meeting a couple weeks ago. Why don't you catch us up and let us know what we should do here?
You want to go ahead?
Sure. I think the bottom line is the committee request was that their date be extended through December 31st. And in the course of that conversation, I commented that that may not be sufficient timing because what their request revolved around was allowing them to go through the RTM ordinance approval process. And my concern was timing, the amount of time it takes to pass an ordinance at the RTM level. Realistically, it will be difficult. It's likely to be difficult because it first is seen by LNA and then is heard by the full body, and then in the third month has the opportunity to be voted on, assuming there are no major amendments. If there are major amendments, it gets held over again, which takes us very close to the election.
If I might ask, have they done anything up to this point? As the process started, is the RTM aware of this? It seemed a year ago when we started this, there were sponsors in place and a proposed ordinance drafted. In the last year, has any progress been made on that?
What Mr. Kennelly shared with us last week, and please
Yeah,
jump in.
I didn't bring that with me.
He actually shared that he had spoken with folks on both sides of the aisle. I don't know, he didn't get into the extent of those conversations, but said that they were hoping to get ordinance language, which they did provide, and I think I provided a copy of that.
Right.
They have, as a group, agreed on ordinance language that they would like to give to the RTM. Now, having served on LNA and the RTM, the length of that document and what is involved there will, in my opinion, involve quite a bit of discussion. And as we know, this has become something that is fairly significant to both elected leaders who make use of this service to inform themselves as well as the public. I just don't think that a December 31st date will be enough.
What's your
to get
proposal?
through. So I would actually propose that we go ahead and extend it even to June, to a year from now, even though they may not need that amount of time. My hope would be that they would, realistically, it's not going to be at the first, it could be at the December meeting of the RTM or the November or December, with the understanding, if we gave them a June date, with the understanding that we expect this process to be moved through as quickly as possible. I don't think anyone on that committee wants to continue in this type of committee. There may be members who want to serve on a more permanent committee, but all those who are serving on this serve with the understanding that they would be following this charge and moving it through the process. So,
Okay, I think if that's a motion, is to amend is there a second?
I'm not sure I'm ready to make a motion. I think
Okay.
maybe Selectman Kiley, having been there and heard, I would, before making a motion to that end, would like to hear.
Okay, and everything you said is accurate. As a matter of fact, when Mr. Kennelly was here, he was asking for 6 months, and then he took a step back and said, I'll even take 3 months, and that's going in the wrong direction, because they'll never get it done in 3 months, because we have summer vacations and all that stuff, and there's a lot going on. So 6 months, they're going to need 6 months for sure, if not 9 or 12, right? Definitely 6, but they have made some progress. They have met with the RTM, that's accurate, and they've had informal meetings, and they do have some language put together, so they have made some progress.
Good.
And they've done some work. And I came away feeling generally encouraged by the report they gave us. We still need to read through all the charter or all the ordinance language to see if we agree with it, because there were some changes to it from previous discussions we had had. So some of that will have to happen as well. So I would certainly support a minimum of 6, 9, or 12 months. I'm a little worried about going too far in case it takes too long. So, but 3 is no good. 6 is maybe, 9 is probably okay, and 12 might be a hair too much.
I think, so I'd go with 9. I think that sounds like a good compromise, because you're going to have a new RTM in November. So if they can't get it past this term, they
gotta
definitely
reboot a
need
little.
more than 6. So
I would
think the
agree
9
with that.
would be.
See, that would argue for June.
Would you?
Well, just because if you have a new RTM, you have a changeover, you don't get anything done in December. You bring some people on board, or November then, you don't get anything done in November.
Right, no, you
Sorry,
don't.
it was one of
No.
those two.
Yeah.
Right. It'll
You're
either
right.
beat December, or it'll be 3, 4 months past it, is what you're saying.
So that's,
Do you want to go to June? I mean, I'm fine. I think there is motivation within that committee to get
To
it
get
done
it
as
done.
quickly as
I
they
agree.
can, and create the ordinance and have a permanent committee for them to be a part of. So I don't think there's any reason to believe they would use more time than, necessary.
And June gives them 2 follow-up meetings after budget season to potentially clean that up if they need to.
Right, because we bumped up against that this year with them, right? Back in March, April. It was
Yeah,
budget
we
for
did.
us, and we had, 15 meetings and all that stuff. Right.
So I would make a motion to extend the date to June 30th, 2014,
All right, is there a second?
There is a second.
Any further discussion?
with the caveat that it be accomplished as quickly as possible,
Well, I think,
in the way that allows the process to be done effectively, but,
we will communicate that collectively and individually.
yeah.
There's plenty of incentive there.
Yes, exactly.
Is there a second?
Oh, second.
Yes.
Any further discussion? Any comments from the public? Back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
One other, just
Oh,
follow-up, sorry. Follow-up from last time, Selectman Kylie had asked for us the reporting, and I just wanted to make sure we had that
Yeah,
noted.
they had showed us some they showed us some reporting, and then they mentioned a quarterly financial report that they had, so Mr. Kennelly said he would provide us with some version of that, whether it was monthly or
Right.
quarterly, for us to review.
Right.
Jen, will you make a note on that?
Yes, so I just wanted to
Thank you for
follow
remembering
up with that. Yes, thank you. Okay. Promise I won't say anything else about this.
Okay. All right, I think we have several dates here to change, if we do this properly.
Okay.
One is the last date, the committee shall terminate on June 30th, but there's also, under duration, committee members shall serve until June 30th and issue a report to the Board of Selectmen prior to June 30th.
Okay.
This report should be limited to, so, was that the report we got? Or are you asking for a more up-to-date report on that, per the current charge? While we're looking
Well, I
at
think
that,
the
Kristen,
report
I'm assuming that what you mean is wherever it says 2013, it should be changed to 2014?
Yes,
Yes.
that's what my intention was.
Well, they did provide us a report, and I think that met this requirement, did it not?
I agree.
I mean, without it being approved, adopted, and the ordinance being part of it, which was not possible, right?
Right. And not within our purview in terms of ordinance. However, I think that, I don't know that we need to change language. I believe that the committee, if we ask them to come for a report, I believe they would.
Yeah,
And
I'm
if
just
we
asking
wanna
if they
follow.
accomplish what this says, and if so, are we okay with that? And was the quarterly financial information just in addition to this?
It was in addition to this.
Right, so they met this requirement, so we don't have to worry about, we can kind of cross that off our checklist. Is that
I
fair?
believe so.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Then, again, Kristen, just to clarify, your motion is that we change all 3 2013 references to 2014?
Yes.
Any other amendments we need to include in that motion at this point?
I don't believe so.
No.
And I think we're about ready to vote before. Are we ready to vote now?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Jen, if you'll get those changes made, and get those out to the committee so they know that we kind of completed that.
Literally
Right.
the last.
Next up, CT Rides, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolved that the town of Fairfield become a CT Rides partner. I don't see anybody here to present. Kristen, did you want to give us a little
Happy.
background on that?
Yes. Do you need a motion, or do you?
Yes, is there a motion?
I will.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
I met with Marcia Ahrens, the CT Rides representative, originally to work with her on a promotional week that happened right before the train crash. And the partnership, essentially, what it asks of the town is that we be willing to have our name added to this list of proud partners. It says to the DOT that we are working with their CT Rides representative, which is Ms. Ahrens, to look at different options for our town employees. Things and some of the services that they provide are helping people identify other carpoolers and van pullers. People can try free bus passes, the potential for commuter tax benefits, the ability to log your trip and get discounts with various businesses. And so the primary request is that Ms. Ahrens would be able to make contact with the town and just offer the support and services. I, again, had met with her and put her in contact with the deputy superintendent, and she has a meeting with the folks from the central office mid-July. And in addition, our HR department is willing to meet with me and just let me pass along the information in July. So this is really kind of a formal way of saying, yes, we'd like to offer this benefit to our employees. And as she said to me in our meeting, if it benefits even a small handful of people, she's willing to help. So it feels like a win-win, especially when you talk about things like commuter tax benefits. If there's any way for our employees to save money in their commute and for the town to support them in that, I think that's a great option. So that's about all that I have on that.
Any further comments or
No,
discussion?
that's a great summary, and thank you for that, and I agree with everything you said, so.
All right, and just to clarify, there's no cost to the town.
There is no cost to the town. I specifically called her again this morning just to clarify. There is no cost commitment, there is no commitment that way, so.
Any comment from the public? All right, back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now you know how those guys feel on, CNN late at night? Like being in the U.S. Congress at 2 a.m. in the morning. All right. Item 12, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolved that the first selectman or his designee be here and hereby is authorized to approve requests for hanging banners over Sherman Green, and further resolved that the first selectman or his designee be and hereby is authorized to approve requests for usage of Town Green and Mill Plain Green. Is there a move to approve?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All right. Any discussion?
Well, I think we started this discussion, I think Selectman Kylie, one of the recent banner requests
forget-
we had said.
Right.
Can we talk about whether?
The process.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
process. And I
Right.
think, I don't know the whole history of the banner approval process precedes my time on the Board of Selectmen, but my feeling and my sense is that similar, I believe the Parks and Rec has some involvement with the use of
Sherman Green.
Sherman Green. So I am quite comfortable with not necessarily involving the entire Board of Selectmen, especially given the business that we have and kind of the complexity of issues. I am comfortable to move that to whether it's in the first selectman's office or if it makes sense for Parks and Rec to do that, whatever. Again, administratively, you probably have a better sense of that, but I'm comfortable with moving this way. And as long as whatever process is put in place, that those who are requesting are clear about that process and how they go about accessing the information and the process. And again, that it's fair and equitable for everyone, which is, I think, what the Board of Selectmen process has been trying to do, is to be fair.
Right.
So.
I think it makes sense to centralize it and put it under the, the first selectman's office. And I guess if there were any contentious ones or any requests that you or your office was not comfortable with, we would be happy to discuss them and look at those specific ones. But as far as the normal run-of-the-mill, request, I think it makes sense to run them through your office.
I think given the lateness of this hour, so it's 7 o'clock, we're approaching a 3-hour meeting here very shortly, and that seems to be the norm rather than the exception. I think that there's enough items before the Board of Selectmen that really deserve our attention. This seems to me more of an administrative matter.
It does.
We did our best to make it administrative and move it through the Board of Selectmen. It's still taking a lot of time in that. I think if we do that, to me, here's the fallback. It may mean that one organization, gets turned down at some point, but we don't turn them down forever. And if the Board of Selectmen needed to take this process back at some point, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that. We're doing this just for kind of ease of operation of the Board of Selectmen meetings. So so we'll take a look at whether we should do it through the First Selectman's office or through Parks and Rec. I think that's a good suggestion on some of these.
Sure.
Talk that over with the Parks and Rec staff and see what the best approach is. We do have guidelines already drafted for what fits those and what doesn't, and we have at least a year's experience of some exceptions we've made to those guidelines. So I think there's at least a reasonable sense of what this body agrees with or is willing to do. And like I said, I think that anything that's done that is a one-year issue and can be corrected in following years by this board deciding to make an exception.
Sounds good. And if there's an item that's a major deviation from that, please come to us and we're happy to weigh in.
And I think what we've tried to do in other cases where we're saying no to something or doing something or potentially approving something that might not quite fit, I've tried to notify the board, just say, hey, we did this. So you're aware of that and potentially any concerns or modifications can be addressed. So we'll try and keep that as open as we can.
Absolutely.
All right, any further discussion?
Nope.
Public is gone. Any, back to the board? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, to hear an update on fire department staffing. This item was postponed from last meeting. There's a note here that Attorney Trembecki is not available for this meeting. It's anticipated this item will be postponed to July 2nd. May I have well, it's not an action item, so we can just reschedule it, I think.
My question was, in fact, maybe we should have done that last time, is to take no action and then it comes back at the right...
It wouldn't have to be
At the right
today.
time.
Yeah.
Right.
For a non-voting item, I think that, actually for a voting item, you can do that too, as long as there's no other prior process. So,
Right.
One, I do want to thank both of you. Since I wasn't able to make the last meeting, I thank you for holding this over and giving me a chance to participate in this. So I very much appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
All right. Next up, tax collector, refunds. Can I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Here, consider an act on any communications, none that I'm aware of. Here, consider an act upon any other business that shall properly come before this meeting. There's none that I'm aware of. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you both.
Thank you.